The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that pressed against the walls, thick with tension. The judge, a stern-looking woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing, sat at the bench, scanning the room. Lawyers whispered in hushed tones, papers rustled, and the occasional cough broke the stillness, but all eyes kept flicking back to one person, the little girl sitting at the witness stand. She couldn't have been older than 8, her small frame swallowed up by the large wooden chair. Her hands rested on her lap, her fingers curling into the fabric of her dress. She had been called to testify in a case that had gripped the entire town, a case that had left people questioning everything they thought they knew. Beside her, sitting obediently on the floor, was a golden retriever, her service dog. He wasn't just any dog. He was her protector, her shadow, and on that day, her voice when words failed her. The defense attorney, a man with neatly combed hair and a voice so smooth it could convince anyone of anything, approached her slowly. He crouched down slightly to meet her eye level, offering what was meant to be a reassuring smile. "Sweetheart, do you know why you're here today?" he asked gently. The little girl swallowed hard and nodded. "You're very brave," he continued, his tone soft but leading. "Now, I need you to tell us the truth. Can you do that for me?" She glanced at the judge, then at the rows of unfamiliar faces staring back at her. Her bottom lip trembled, and her grip tightened on the fur of the golden retriever sitting beside her. He was her rock, her source of comfort. The lawyer straightened up, glancing at the jury. "We just need to hear what happened. No one here will be mad at you. Just tell us the truth." The little girl took a deep breath, opened her mouth, then hesitated. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. She turned her gaze downward, her fingers moving almost imperceptibly against the dog's fur. It was a tiny movement, so small that most people wouldn't have noticed. But someone did. The dog's ears perked up. Then, in an instant, everything changed. Before anyone could react, the judge's voice rang through the room. "Stop!" The defense attorney froze mid-step, his face contorted in confusion. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom as everyone turned toward the judge. She was staring intently at the little girl, her expression unreadable. "What did you just do?" the judge asked, her voice carrying a weight that sent a chill through the air. The little girl's eyes widened, as if caught in a secret she never meant to reveal. The golden retriever, now suddenly alert, let out a low whimper. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. And in that moment, everyone in the courtroom knew they had missed something. Something big. What had the little girl just signaled to her dog? And why had it made the judge stop everything? The courtroom remained frozen in place, every breath held, every eye locked onto the little girl and her golden retriever. The air felt heavy, charged with an unspoken tension that made even the most seasoned lawyers shift in their seats. The judge leaned forward, her sharp gaze fixed on the child, as if trying to piece together an invisible puzzle. The defense attorney glanced around, clearly caught off guard. He cleared his throat and forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Your Honor, is something wrong?" he asked, his voice measured but laced with uncertainty. The judge didn't answer right away. Instead, she watched the golden retriever, her fingers tapping lightly against the bench. The dog's body was stiff now, his ears twitching, his eyes locked onto his young owner. He wasn't growling, but there was an unmistakable tension in his posture, as if he was waiting for something. The little girl remained silent, her fingers still buried in the thick golden fur. Her shoulders were rigid, her lips pressed together. Then, ever so slowly, she lifted her gaze to meet the judge's eyes. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, the judge exhaled and turned to the bailiff standing near the door. "Get the dog's handler in here. Now!" The room erupted into hushed whispers. The handler? Why would the judge call for him? The defense attorney shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, with all due respect, we're in the middle of a testimony." The judge cut him off with a single look. "This is my courtroom, counselor," she said firmly. and I believe we're all about to learn something very important." The tension only thickened as the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. A tall man in a neatly pressed uniform stepped inside, his expression unreadable. He was the Golden Retriever's official handler, the one responsible for training and monitoring the service dog. He had been sitting just outside, waiting in case his expertise was needed. The moment he stepped in, his gaze swept over the scene before him. His eyes flickered between the little girl and her dog, his brows knitting together ever so slightly. Then, in a voice just loud enough to carry, he asked, "What signal did she give?" The judge gestured toward the dog. "That's what we need to figure out." The handler nodded, stepping closer, his movements slow and careful. He crouched slightly, his eyes scanning the retriever's body language. Then he looked at the little girl. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "can you show me exactly what you did?" The little girl hesitated, her small hands tightening into fists. She looked to her dog, then back at the handler. The weight of 100 unseen emotions flickered across her face. Finally, with a deep breath, she repeated the movement, a tiny brush of her fingers against the dog's fur, almost like a whisper of a touch. The moment she did it, the Golden Retriever's tail stopped wagging. His ears pinned back slightly. He let out a soft whimper, his body tense. The handler's face darkened. For a second, he didn't speak. Then he turned toward the judge. "Your Honor, that's a distress signal." The room fell into a stunned silence. The handler continued, his voice quieter now, but no less urgent. "That's a signal we train service dogs to recognize when their handler is in danger but can't say it out loud. It means something isn't right. It means she's scared." A chill swept through the courtroom. The judge's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something sharp and knowing. "Are you certain?" she asked. The handler nodded. "Absolutely. We teach it in high-risk situations, especially for children who may not be able to verbalize fear." The defense attorney shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing that the case was slipping into unexpected territory. He forced another smile. "Well, children get nervous in courtrooms all the time. It's an overwhelming environment." The handler's jaw tightened. "This isn't courtroom nerves. This is something else." He turned back to the little girl, his tone softening. "Sweetheart, is there something you're afraid of?" The little girl swallowed hard. Her tiny fingers gripped the dog's fur even tighter. Her wide eyes darted across the room, toward the jury, the attorneys, the people in the audience. Then, almost imperceptibly, she shook her head. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she didn't know if she could say it. The judge tapped her fingers against the bench again, a thoughtful, deliberate motion. Then she turned toward the little girl. Her voice, though firm, carried a gentleness that wasn't there before. "You don't have to say anything you don't want to," the judge told her. "But I want you to know something very important." She leaned forward ever so slightly. "You're safe here." The words hung in the air like a promise, one that the little girl desperately wanted to believe. The Golden Retriever nudged his nose against her arm as if reminding her he was still there. The defense attorney exhaled loudly, clearly eager to move past whatever was happening. "Your Honor, if we could return to the questioning." The judge silenced him with a look. Then she turned back to the little girl. "Would you feel better if your dog stayed with you the whole time?" The girl hesitated, then nodded. The judge gave a small nod in return. "Then that's exactly what we'll do." For the first time since she took the stand, the little girl seemed to breathe a little easier. But the tension in the room remained, thick and unrelenting. Because now everyone knew something was very, very wrong. And no one was leaving this courtroom until they figured out what. The air in the courtroom felt heavier now, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. The little girl sat stiffly in the witness chair, her small fingers still tangled in the golden retriever's fur. The dog hadn't moved, but his body remained tense, his eyes locked on his handler, as if waiting for a command. The judge studied the child carefully. There was something unspoken here, something no one had noticed until now. The defense attorney, still standing near the witness stand, adjusted his tie and let out a slow breath. Your Honor, while I appreciate the concern, I must remind the court that we're here to establish facts, not interpret a child's nervousness as something more than it is. The judge didn't look at him. Instead, she turned her attention back to the handler. If this is a distress signal, what does that tell us? The handler's face remained serious. It means she doesn't feel safe. It means she believes there's a threat. Right here in this room. A murmur rippled through the audience. The jury exchanged uncertain glances. The defense attorney shook his head. This is absurd. A courtroom is one of the safest places a person can be. The handler's gaze didn't waver. That's not how fear works. The judge took a long pause before finally looking back at the little girl. Sweetheart, I'm going to ask you something very important. And you don't have to say anything if you don't want to. But if you feel safe answering, I'd like to know, do you recognize someone in this courtroom that makes you scared? The little girl's shoulders hunched slightly. She lowered her head, avoiding everyone's eyes. Her grip on the retriever's fur tightened. The dog, sensing her distress, let out a soft whimper. Then, without lifting her head, she nodded. The room erupted into gasps and hushed whispers. The judge quickly raised a hand. Silence. The courtroom fell quiet again, but the energy had shifted. The defense attorney opened his mouth as if to argue, but for the first time, he hesitated. His confidence wavered just slightly. The judge's voice softened. Can you point to them? The little girl inhaled shakily, her fingers trembling. She hesitated. Then ever so slightly, she lifted her hand. It was barely noticeable, just the smallest motion, until her finger landed on someone. The tension snapped like a rubber band pulled too tight. The room collectively turned to see who she was pointing at. And when they did, the silence became deafening. Because she wasn't pointing at the defense attorney. She wasn't pointing at the prosecutor. She wasn't even pointing at someone in the audience. She was pointing at the witness stand, and the person she was accusing was already sitting there. A man in a dark suit, his face unreadable, sat frozen in his chair. He had been testifying before the little girl was called up. He was supposed to be a key witness in this case, a trusted figure, someone whose words carried weight. And yet, now, under the gaze of a terrified child and a dog that wouldn't move, he suddenly seemed different. His hands, which had been folded neatly on the table, clenched slightly. His jaw tightened just a fraction, but his expression didn't change. He didn't speak. He just stared. The judge leaned forward slowly. Sir, she said carefully, is there something you'd like to say? The man finally moved, shifting slightly in his seat. His voice, when he spoke, was even, measured. I don't know why she would point at me, but something about the way he said it, so calm, so composed, only made the unease grow stronger. The little girl didn't lower her hand. Her face remained pale, her eyes locked on the man. The golden retriever, sensing something no one else could, let out a low, almost imperceptible growl. And for the first time, a flicker of something passed through the man's eyes. A shadow of recognition. And just like that, everything in the case had changed. The room felt like it was shrinking, the weight of the little girl's silent accusation pressing down on everyone. The man in the dark suit held his composure, but there was something different now, an unease he was trying to hide. His fingers twitched slightly, his shoulders stiffened. It was subtle, but the kind of change that didn't go unnoticed in a room full of people holding their breath. The judge let the silence stretch for a moment longer. Her sharp eyes locked onto the man as if she were waiting for him to give something away. The little girl hadn't moved. Her finger still pointed directly at him, her hand shaking just enough to make the golden retriever let out another low, warning growl. The defense attorney cleared his throat, shifting on his feet. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is highly unusual. We can't allow a child's vague gesture to derail these proceedings. She hasn't even spoken." The judge didn't look away from the man in the witness stand. "She doesn't need to. Her dog already has." The man shifted slightly, then forced a small, almost amused smile. "This is absurd," he said, his voice smooth, practiced. "She's a scared little girl in a strange place. How do we know she isn't just overwhelmed?" The golden retriever let out another growl, this time a little louder. The handler, still standing nearby, knelt beside the dog, watching carefully. "Dogs don't lie," he said, his voice calm but firm. "They react to what's real." A flicker of something, annoyance? Fear? Passed through the man's eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. "I don't even know this child," he said. "This is a misunderstanding." The little girl flinched at his voice. Not much, just a tiny jerk of her shoulders, but the reaction was instant. The dog pushed against her protectively, and the judge saw it. Her gaze sharpened. "Counselor, remind me, how is this witness involved in the case?" The prosecutor straightened in his seat, flipping through his notes. "He's a character witness, Your Honor. He provided testimony about the defendant's background." The judge nodded slowly, then turned back to the man. "You testified earlier that you have no connection to the victim. Is that correct?" The man didn't hesitate. "That's correct." The judge leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping lightly against the desk. A slow, thoughtful rhythm. "Then why," she asked, "is this child terrified of you?" The question cut through the room like a blade. The man hesitated. It was brief, so brief that most people might have missed it, but the judge didn't miss it. Neither did the handler. Neither did the little girl. The golden retriever let out a low whimper, pressing closer to the girl. The man forced another smile, shaking his head. "I don't know. I wish I could explain it, but—" He stopped, because the little girl had moved. She wasn't pointing at him anymore. Her hands, small and shaking, had reached into the pocket of her dress. And slowly, carefully, she pulled something out. A small, crumpled piece of paper. The judge watched as the girl unfolded it with trembling fingers. It was old, the edges worn and creased from being held too many times. She stared at it for a long moment, her lips pressed together. Then, without a word, she held it up. The handler stepped closer, peering at it. The moment his eyes landed on the paper, his face changed. The color drained from his expression, his jaw tightening. He turned to the judge. "Your Honor," he said, his voice lower now. "We need to see that paper." The judge gestured for the bailiff, who walked over and carefully took the paper from the girl's shaking hands. He carried it to the judge, who unfolded it completely and read the words written inside. Her face didn't change, but something in her eyes did. A shift, a realization, a piece of the puzzle clicking into place. She turned her gaze back to the man in the witness stand, and when she spoke, her voice was calm, but with an edge sharp enough to cut through stone. "I think," she said, "you have some explaining to do." The man's smile faded. And just like that, the courtroom was no longer just a courtroom. It was a trap closing in. The man in the witness stand didn't speak right away. His eyes flickered to the judge, then to the paper now resting in front of her. The tension in the room tightened like a wire stretched to its limit. The golden retriever, still pressed close to the little girl, let out a soft, uneasy whine. The judge's fingers rested lightly on the paper, but she didn't lift it. Instead, she studied the man carefully, as if measuring his next move before he even made it. You testified under oath that you had no connection to the victim, she said, her voice steady. So tell me, why would this child be holding a piece of paper with your name on it? A murmur spread through the courtroom. The defense attorney shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. Your Honor, we have no proof that. The judge raised a hand, silencing him. Let's allow him to answer. The man in the witness stand inhaled slowly. When he spoke, his voice was smooth, careful. I don't know what that is. The judge finally lifted the paper, unfolding it completely. Her eyes scanned the words, and for the first time, something almost like disbelief crossed her face. She turned to the handler. Would you mind reading this aloud? The handler took the paper with steady hands, his eyes moving over the writing, his brow furrowed. Then, in a quiet but firm voice, he read, If anything happens, find the girl. The room fell into absolute silence. The handler's voice remained even as he continued. It's signed with initials. S.M. The prosecutor's pen, which had been poised above his notepad, suddenly froze mid-air. His eyes shot up. S.M.? The defense attorney's face darkened. This doesn't mean anything. The judge ignored him. Who is S.M.? The handler exhaled sharply, setting the paper down. That's what we need to find out. But before anyone could respond, the little girl let out a tiny, whispered sound. A name. Sam. All eyes turned to her. She hadn't spoken much since she took the stand, but now her voice was barely above a breath. She clutched the retriever's fur tightly, her small fingers trembling. The handler crouched beside her. Sweetheart, can you tell us who Sam is? Her lips parted, but no sound came out at first. She swallowed hard, glancing at the man in the witness stand. For a moment, it looked like she was too scared to speak. But then, in a voice so soft it barely carried through the room, she whispered, He's my friend. The handler's expression tightened. Where is he now? The little girl's eyes filled with something unreadable. Then she said something that sent a chill through the entire room. They took him. A cold, heavy silence settled over the courtroom. The judge leaned forward. Who took him, sweetheart? The little girl's gaze flickered again to the man in the witness stand. She didn't point this time. She didn't have to. The man finally spoke, his voice steady but carrying an edge of frustration. This is ridiculous. We're relying on a child's frightened imagination. The judge wasn't convinced. She doesn't seem to be imagining anything. The prosecutor was already flipping through his notes, his expression growing more focused by the second. Your Honor, I think we need a short recess. There's something I need to check. The judge nodded, but before she could call for it, the handler, who had been studying the little girl closely, spoke up. Your Honor. His voice was different now, almost urgent. The judge turned to him. Yes. The handler hesitated, then pointed at the golden retriever. The dog isn't just reacting to the girl's fear. He's been trained to alert to a specific scent. The man in the witness stand stiffened. The handler's eyes narrowed slightly. I'd like to request that he be allowed to follow it. The defense attorney shot to his feet. Absolutely not. This is a courtroom, not a crime scene. The judge ignored him. She looked at the handler, then at the golden retriever, who hadn't taken his eyes off the man in the witness stand. Then, with a nod, she made her decision. Let the dog work. The defense attorney's mouth opened in protest, but before he could argue, the golden retriever suddenly lunged forward, not in attack, but in pursuit. And the man in the witness stand, for the first time, lost his composure. Because he stood up too fast, too defensive. And in that moment, everyone knew he was running out of ways to hide. The room erupted into chaos. The golden retriever moved with purpose, his nose to the ground, following a scent only he could detect. His handler was right behind him, his eyes locked onto the man in the witness stand, whose composed mask had finally cracked. The tension that had been building throughout the trial snapped, and for the first time everyone could see it, the fear in his eyes. The judge slammed her gavel down, demanding order, but the energy in the courtroom had shifted. This was no longer just about a testimony. Something bigger was unfolding. The prosecutor shot to his feet, flipping through his notes with urgency. The defense attorney stammered, trying to object, but his voice wavered. And then, the golden retriever stopped. He was at the witness stand, his head lowered, body tense, his nose pressed to the side of the man's expensive suit. A deep, guttural growl rumbled from his chest. It was a sound of certainty, of warning. The handler's voice cut through the noise. "He's picked up the scent." The man in the witness stand clenched his jaw. "This is absurd. What are you even accusing me of?" The judge leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "I think you already know." The prosecutor suddenly exhaled sharply, as if pieces were falling into place. "Your Honor," he said, turning a page in his notes, "the initials on that note, SM, they match someone connected to this case." He looked up, his face grave. "Samuel Morrison." The moment the name was spoken, the little girl flinched. The golden retriever let out another low growl, shifting his weight. The handler's expression darkened. The prosecutor's voice grew more certain. Samuel Morrison was reported missing 3 months ago. He was a caseworker assigned to this child. A ripple of shock swept through the courtroom. The man in the witness stand didn't move, but his knuckles turned white where they gripped the stand. "That's a coincidence," he said, but his voice had lost its confidence. The judge turned to the little girl. "Sweetheart, is that the Sam you were talking about?" The girl didn't speak. She just nodded. And in that moment, everything changed. The handler spoke next, his voice lower, more deliberate. "Your Honor, if my dog is reacting, it means this man has been in close contact with Samuel Morrison, possibly after his disappearance." The judge's expression hardened. "Sir, I suggest you explain yourself. Now." The man hesitated. Then, without warning, he bolted. Gasps erupted from the audience as he shoved past the bailiff, trying to make it to the exit. But he didn't make it far. The handler reacted instantly, issuing a sharp command to the retriever. The dog lunged, not to attack, but to block, positioning himself in front of the door, a wall of golden fur standing between the man and his escape. The bailiff and another officer closed in, grabbing him before he could push past them. He struggled, but it was over. The courtroom filled with hushed, stunned whispers. The prosecutor took a steady breath before turning back to the judge. "Your Honor, I request an immediate investigation into this witness. His connection to Samuel Morrison may be the missing link in this case." The judge nodded sharply. "Granted." The little girl clung to her dog, her small fingers buried in his fur. For the first time, there was something different in her eyes. Not fear, but relief. But just as the tension seemed to break, the handler, who had been studying the golden retriever, spoke again. His tone was cautious, but firm. "There's something else." The judge turned to him. "What do you mean?" The handler placed a hand on the dog's back, feeling the way the retriever's muscles remained stiff, his nose twitching as if something still wasn't right. "He's still alerting." A deep, unsettling quiet fell over the courtroom. And just like that, everyone realized, this wasn't over yet. The golden retriever stood firm, his body tense, his nose twitching. His deep brown eyes were locked onto the man being restrained, but there was something else, something more. The handler kept a firm grip on the leash, his face unreadable. The room had fallen into a hushed stillness, every person waiting, barely breathing. The judge's voice was calm but demanding. "What do you mean, he's still alerting?" The handler didn't take his eyes off his dog. "It means there's still something here. Something we haven't uncovered yet." The little girl, still gripping the dog's fur, seemed to understand before anyone else. She turned toward the man, her wide eyes filled with something between recognition and fear. "He's lying," she whispered. The man tried to shake off the officer's hold, but they didn't let go. His face twisted, but the confident, smooth mask was gone. The sweat on his forehead was unmistakable now. "I don't know what you're talking about," he spat. The golden retriever let out a low, unwavering growl. The handler's jaw tightened. "I think you do." The prosecutor had already picked up his pen again, flipping rapidly through his notes. The missing caseworker, the secret note, the girl's fear, it was all circling toward something bigger. "Your Honor," he said carefully, "I request that we extend the investigation beyond Mr. Morrison's disappearance. If the dog is still reacting, there may be more we haven't found." The judge nodded. "I agree." She turned to the bailiff. "Take him into custody." The man fought, jerking against their grip, but it was no use. The officer secured him, leading him toward the exit as the murmurs in the courtroom grew. But just before he was taken through the doors, the little girl spoke again. "You hurt Sam." The words weren't loud, but they carried. They made the man's shoulders jerk for just a fraction of a second. He didn't turn around, but his body language was enough. Everyone saw it. And for the first time since the trial began, his silence spoke louder than any denial ever could. The door shut behind him, and the room let out a collective exhale. The tension didn't disappear entirely, but it shifted. The little girl sagged slightly against the golden retriever, her small fingers still curled into his fur. The handler crouched beside her, his voice gentle. "It's okay. You did great." She nodded, though she didn't speak. But when the dog nudged her hand, her lips twitched, just barely, into something close to a smile. The judge took a breath, sitting back in her chair. "We will be calling for a full investigation into this matter immediately," she said, her voice steady. "But more importantly, I want to acknowledge the bravery of this child and her service dog. Without them, we may have never uncovered the truth." A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the room. The prosecutor gave the little girl a small nod, as if silently thanking her. The defense attorney, for once, had nothing to say. As the courtroom began to clear, the handler walked over to the prosecutor, his voice quiet. "We're going to need to follow up on this. If Sam Morrison was trying to protect her, there might be more to this than we realize." The prosecutor nodded. "I'll make sure we do." The little girl held onto the leash as she was guided toward the door, her golden retriever walking beside her with unwavering loyalty. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Outside the courthouse, the air felt lighter. The weight she had been carrying, the one no one had believed before today, was finally lifting. The golden retriever pressed against her side, his presence solid and warm. She knelt down beside him, wrapping her arms around his neck. He didn't move, just let her hold him, the way he always did. The handler crouched next to them, his voice soft. "You're safe now." The little girl nodded. For the first time in a long time, she believed it.